Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Been a little while since I've really done any work on the 6.3. As you know, I've been a bit preoccupied with other projects, the 4.5 subframe issue, the SLs, both SL, the gold one and the red one that came my way recently that I'm helping selling for a friend. So anyway, in the meantime, I got the engine block back, some of you know, from the machine shop. And so in this video, I thought I'd go over the costs of things so far just on the short block. You know, I'm not including the head work yet because I've still got some stuff doing on those. So I just thought just the actual expenditure that I've paid out so far to get the short block assembled. I haven't assembled it yet, obviously, but to be able to get to that point. So I thought it'd be interesting because, you know, not a lot of people talk about the actual costs involved in doing something like this. I thought you'd be interested in machining, all that stuff. So first things first, obviously you saw me all strip it down, so we don't have to talk about that because that's all my labor and that's why we're doing this, isn't it? So so getting it to the machine shop, I took over obviously the block, we took over the crank, the harmonic balancer and the pulley attached to it, and the rear flex plate. We took over the pistons that came with, and we'll talk about the cost of the pistons again in a second, that came with pins, clips and rings. We took over the connecting rods that I already installed the bushings to for weighing and the balancing process. So starting with the pistons, as you know, I got those from Marley Pistons. Total price for those oversized pistons, we went to 103.75. That was the size we needed to get rid of the scratches that was on cylinder number 5. So that came with obviously the pistons, the rings, the pins, the clips, and what I did, I sent them an original so they could take all the relevant sizing, you know, pin to top of the piston relation and the crank, all that. They measured all that, so, and they sent that back fairly promptly. So anyway, so $18.50 for the pistons. Took about 4 months or so to get those, and as you know, I'm not in any hurry, so that was no biggie. And as far as parts that I bought, extra parts now were bearings. Now you've got obviously the crank bearings and the rod bearings. Say the bearings, the connecting rod bearings, list price around $500. I didn't pay that, got a little discount, which I think some members of the Mercedes-Benz Club of America get a discount. So I paid $399 for these, so you're about $400 for the connecting rod shells. The crank with the discount around $550. So we've got standard crank, and those, they came to $550. So you're looking at around $950 for just the bearing shells. So that's that. Then we have the seal kit for the valve stems, around $100 for the seal kits, about $170 for the bushings. Now I did press the old ones out and put these in, but they do need honing out to accept the new pins on the new pistons. So those are the parts I bought for the main part of the engine. Then we've obviously got the two seals, the rear and front seal. Now the rear one is a two-part. It's got like a neoprene backing and then the rope seal. I bought that from, I think, MB Classics in Germany. They ran the seals, I think that was around about $75 for both seals. Correct me if I'm wrong, but around about that, you know, not a bank breaker or anything. Now as far as chain, I haven't got the drive chain yet for the oil pump. I'll probably be replacing that. I'm estimating around $100. I don't know exactly yet. And obviously the timing chain, that also I haven't bought yet, but again, I think about $100, but that's not really involved in the short block assembly yet. But now as far as machining costs, you need to have, first of all, the block has got to be thoroughly cleaned. It gets hot tanks, and I asked them on Duke's advice in the group to not put it in there at high temperature for a long time because we want to preserve the Gliptol paint on the inside. I'm not too worried about the outside because I'm going to retreat the outside of the block with the Gliptol, which I've done a little inquiry. It was treated with Gliptol red paint on the outside, then coated in a black. I'm going to err on the side of caution. I'm not repainting on the inside of the block, the Gliptor. It looks to have survived the tank very well, and there's always a risk of, if I don't get that absolutely clean, I mean, I'm confident I could get it clean and clean enough for Gliptor paint, but I thought, you know what, why go there? It looks good, it's fine. So I'm going to leave the inside of the block as it is. The Gliptor paint is there for fast oil return, so it slides off the castings well, it fills those pores. Also it aids in reducing oil foaming, where the oil's tumbling across the casting, can foam the oil apparently. So I'm going to err on the side of caution, so we're only going to be painting the outside, and I estimate the paint's around $75. Gliptor paint by brush is around $60. Well, so my paint cost's going to be around $100, I think, with the black and everything, and all the preparation. Now, as far as machining costs, as I say, the block has to be cleaned. Magnaflux, before they do anything else, they're checking for cracks. No point putting all this work in if you've got a crack somewhere on the saddles of the crank bearing area, you know, checking those web areas. If they've got crack there, you know, forget about this block. So thankfully that passed with flying colours. Now, as far as cleaning, the cleaning costs, 1.6 hours of labour on the cleaning, that came to around $230. Magnaflux, $116 to Magnaflux the block, and he passed it good. There was no problem with that. Okay, so someone just popped over. So what we got here, so surface in the block, 1.8 hours at $260. Just take a lick off of here. Looks like he took 8 thousandths off of the block, off of the surfaces, because that's what he needed. So all of the block work came to about $900. So that's what, you know, obviously there's going to be variance depending on someone's block they take in, depending on what work's needed, but that gives you some kind of idea what you're looking at. Now the next thing was the crank assembly. Now I talked about it before, the whole rotating assembly has to go in for balancing, because we've got new pistons, drastically different weights to the originals, and if you don't balance them, this thing will be rocking itself to pieces. So the whole crank, the rods, the pistons, the rings, everything on the rotating assembly, flex plate, harmonic balancer has to go in to be balanced. So also I wanted him to hone out the small end bushings on the connecting rods for the new pins. Now that cost came to around $174 to do the pins, and the balancing took him 4 hours, and that was $580. Now that consists of weighing each end of the rods, okay, and then the rod overall, okay, and balancing all those. So the end weight, so this goes on a pivot point, this gets weighed here, okay, and that is balanced with all the other 7. That gets weighed here, and that's balanced to the other 7, and they take material off these areas here to balance it, and then making sure overall it's true, okay. And then even the shells are weighed as well. And also he added, whether he made note here, he added just a little bit for a little extra oil on the big ends. A couple of grams I think it was on the big ends for oil circulation, so they even take into consideration the weight of the oil as well, and so that came to $580. And also polished the crank. He polished the crank journals. There was no machining needed on the crank. It was a beautiful shape, so that just needed polishing, and that took him half an hour, so that was $87. So with the block and all of the balancing, it came to a grand total of $1,750. That's with the environmental charge and all that good stuff. And as far as what he bought it out to, he bought that out to 103.75. That's obviously not a standard repair size from Mercedes, but I don't have standard Mercedes piston set because they're crazy expensive, and these are Marley pistons anyway. So we went, number 5 was the guide to what we needed to take out, because that was the heavily scored one. So we needed to take it out 0.75 of a millimeter to get rid of that scoring and blemishes, and obviously all the rest to match, and then the cross hatch and all that put into it. And so I think as far as the short block, those are the costs involved. So let me add everything up for you and we'll see what the total is. Okay, with everything I've mentioned so far, we've talked about in this video, it comes to $5,293. Now that is obviously going to vary from engine to engine and what work is needed. So that includes the chain is approximately $200 for the timing chain, and that's going to vary a little bit depending on where I get it from. So that is where we're at right now, and so what I can do in the coming weeks or so is we're going to prep this block, get this thing onto the engine stand, and prep the block for painting. Okay, mask all the mating surfaces off, because obviously you don't want to get any paint on there at all. So this is going to be Gliptol on the outside, and then treated with an engine paint, and I'm going to go with a semi-gloss. I don't like the gloss ones, just looks horrible to me, I think, but I'm going to go for semi-gloss over the top, obviously proper engine paint to withstand the heat. Gliptol is supposed to be baked, but what I've read about it, the actual warming of the engine and the heat cycles then is going to bake it fine, so I'm not really worried about that. The inside, as I say, I'm not going to be painting, just thoroughly cleaning. Before any of this is going back together, I'm going to be double checking all the measurements with my dial bore gauge, cross-checking all of the journals with the crank journals cranked down, and we'll be checking all the measurements before anything goes back. And just we're going to obviously be running plastic gauge and doing all the clearance checks. So not in any big rush, we've got to do this right, because you get kind of one shot at it. So now, this is the first time I've ever done an engine of this size. I have rebuilt an old VW Beetle engine years and years ago back in the UK. Obviously a completely different animal, but what I'd recommend is do a little of your homework about the language and the lingo that goes towards these rebuilds. If you haven't done anything like this before, you go in some of these machine shops and they look at you as though you just landed from Mars or something. So if you go in there knowing what you want, so you can kind of communicate a little clearly, because some of them, this guy here locally, he's a nice bloke, and he invited me in the back and we had a good chat and a laugh, and you build a relationship with him and a trust, which is something you want when you're doing something like this. And if you go in a shop, this is my advice, this is my gut feeling, and they treat you like an idiot, then go to another shop. Try and go with recommendations in the area, ask around. So yeah, get some lingo down so you can kind of follow what they're talking about, and check, clarify measurements, all that, maybe on emails, so everyone's clear of what is happening, because the last thing you want is there to be a screw up in the machining, and it's going to cost you, not them. They're going to, throw their hands up. So get stuff in writing, on emails and stuff, so the communication is, and you're clear about everything. Other than that, really, just take your time and enjoy it. That's the main thing. Enjoy the process. That's what I'm doing. Just want to show you how the parts come back. This is obviously the harmonic balancer and the pulley. It's all been blasted, and this was balanced on the on his machine. You can see the drill out here. He's drilled this various places to make sure this is balanced correctly. So the rubber connecting piece right here, and at the back here, all nice and clean now. So that's that. This is, I'm not gonna undo the crank right now, but this is how the crank comes back, and I can see all beautifully polished, all ready to roll. So I'm going to leave that wrapped until we're ready to put the crank in, so that stays there. Okay, one other thing I wanted to make sure, when you're taking these apart, I did it's funny because I got lots of video of all this, obviously, which was very handy, it turns out. one of his guys blasted the flex plate, okay, blasted it clean, and he couldn't see my mark where I'd marked this in relation to the end of the crank. And that's vital because see these cut out balance marks here? This is from, I suppose, factory balancing. And if he mounts this in the wrong way, say it's supposed to be here and it ends up mounting here, you're going to get a throw. So he was just going to zero this out on its own, but I reviewed one of our older videos and just faintly we found the cross mark here by these two holes, and I can see it now. We couldn't see this before. I just hadn't really ground it in, but luckily there. So he's rebalanced it, made sure it's balanced correctly, and put 2 dots in relation to this and the crank. So that's important when you're taking this stuff apart. Make sure you make some kind of mark for the machinist before you take it off. Another thing, when he made up the bobbin weights for the crank, they came to around 2,800 grams. Said some of the largest bobbin weights he'd made up for a long time, because I'll show you why. So here's why. Now this is a connecting rod from a 4.5 Mercedes M117. That's a connecting rod, fairly, you know, straightforward bit of kit there. And compared to the 6.3 next to it here, you can see the neck is massively thicker than the, put that next to each other like that. You can see it's quite a unit. So he thought these were beautiful rods. He said, what a beautiful rod, over-engineered. And he said, typical of the Germans, but he thought these were wonderful things. And that's why this rotating assembly was pretty beefy. And so he's got it zeroed down to, I can't remember the specs right now, but he's got it zeroed out beautifully and balanced. So there you go, kind of fun stuff, eh? You can see the flat side and then the chamfered side. This goes against the edge of the crank. You've got to make sure that's the right way around. You get that wrong, it'll destroy the crank. So this essentially is the flat side for the flat side of the other rod there as it goes. So anyway, good stuff, eh? Also, another thing about spreading the cost over a longer period of time with this project, it helps with the budget. You know, laying out all this money in one here, I think kind of a little unnecessary, because I've got so much to do on the rest of the car anyway, varying from bodywork to painting, etc, etc. There's so much to do. I didn't want a lot of money tied up in parts that are just sitting there waiting around anyway. I'm kind of spreading the load, so to speak. And also another benefit of doing that, when you're switching from something very mechanical and measured, like engine build or anything to do with the engine, you know, there's a certain measurement and tolerance. It just has to be. It's not a question of whether you want it one way or another. It just has to be that way. So it's got one part of your brain is occupied with that kind of approach to the restoration, as opposed to, say, something like welding and fabrication of patches that incorporates a much different part of your brain, so to speak. And that's something where it's more of an artistic thing. So they're very two different aspects of the restoration, which I really enjoy. Kind of, you know, jumping from one to the other, it really keeps you on your toes. And then there's obviously some grunt work, you know, prepping parts for plating and things of that nature, but it's all fun in its own respect. So spreading it around helps with the old pocketbook. Let's say I finish up this video now, but we've talked about the cost of the short block. I am going to do a little bit of other parts regarding the other costs, you know, from bodywork, paint, metal, welding, all that kind of stuff, and we'll just have it as a kind of a side series so you can kind of see what it costs to do a restoration of this size. Until next time, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Please hit like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.